Hi, this is Mr. Rennie, and this is the video for Honors Geometry, Section 1.1a, Points, Lines, and Planes. By the end of the lesson, you should be able to identify, name, and draw points, lines, segments, rays, and planes. It's a lot of vocabulary, and in geometry, the vocabulary is going to be extremely important. If you've ever looked up a word in the dictionary, sometimes there's a word in there that you don't know, and so you go look up that word. Let's say you don't know what disconcert means. You look at that definition, and maybe you don't know what perturb means. So you look up that definition, and then you don't know what disquiet means, and you click that definition. You can go on forever until you get to words that you understand. To take care of that idea in math, we have what are called undefined terms, and those are starting points. Everything else that we define is based on those words. It's based on descriptions of those words. So in geometry, the undefined words are point, line, and plane. So we'll give you a description, but we don't officially call them definitions. So first is a point. You might think of it as a dot, a tip, a place. That might mean something outside of geometry, but inside of geometry, we have an official definition, which is that it's a location. And that's how we represent it there. The official definition, you should write that in your notes. That's the one that matters. The way you sort of think of it does not matter. Make sure you know the definitions well. I usually say know them word for word because they become really important later on. Okay, and so when you name a point, you name it with a single capital letter. So on the right-hand side, you have a drawing of what is called point P. We don't have a crazy way to write that. In geometry, we would just write it this way. Sometimes you'll see the word point in front. Most of the time I leave out the word point and I'll just say P. And if there's no symbol or no other indication that it's something other than a point, it's assumed to be a point. Then we have the word line. A generic definition you might think of would be straight, goes on forever. It goes on forever in two directions, so that's part of the official definition. So it's a collection of points with no thickness, and it extends forever in two opposite directions. It has no thickness, so once you draw it, it's automatically, not a line. It's more of a philosophical idea. Um, but you have line AB could be represented that way. This would be called line L. We'll talk about the naming, but you should write down this official definition in your notes now. Feel free to pause when you need to do that. Also, if I talk too quickly, feel free to slow down the video. Let's see. So when you go to name a line, there's two different ways you could name it. On the right-hand side, we have a line drawn there. You can name it with 2 points and a little line symbol above. So the 2 points are capital letters, and the little line symbol that would go above has 2 little arrows on it. So that's one way to name that line. We could also name it line RS. The order of the points does not matter. Second way you can name it is if there is a letter, it's usually in cursive, it's lowercase, it's over near one of the arrows, it does not represent a point, it just represents a label. We could call this line L. If you use that method, you would have the word line in front. And that letter, if you don't know how to write cursive, you can just use lowercase letters, and that should be fine. But keep in mind that that L is not one of the points. It's a name for the line, though it is usually written near one of the arrows. Okay, down below we have an example. So give 3 names for that line. Well, we could use this first method, 2 points with a line symbol. We could call it line NT. We could call it line TN, capital letters because they're points. The other method we could use is to use this lowercase letter. We could call it line E, where you would not have a symbol above the E. Okay, so make sure that you know when to use a symbol, when not to. Make sure you know when to use uppercase and lowercase. All of that matters in geometry because everything in geometry is very specific. It's written a specific way, and that's sort of the struggle of the first chapter usually. The next term is collinear. You can think of it as on the same line, like in this diagram here, picture here, all these nails are along the same line. Even though there's not a line drawn, you could draw a line that passes through them. The official definition, points that are on the same line are points that lie on the same line. So in this diagram here, points K, L, and M are collinear. This entire group is collinear. If I add another point, point P, then the four of those are not collinear. The four of those are non-collinear, but these three are still collinear. All four of them non-collinear. K, L, and M, they are still collinear, even if there's a fourth point somewhere there. So there's your official definition. So pause and write that in your notes. And here's a drawing. Points A, E, O, and U are collinear on line V. So sometimes with these drawings, you'll have trouble picturing the entire thing. But if you think about this, all of this stuff is happening on line V. So start by drawing line V and then worry about decoding the rest of it. It's called line V, a single letter. That means it's just going to be a label near one of the arrows. It doesn't represent a point, it's just a label. Then A, E, O, and U are collinear on it. So they are points on line V, four of them. The order doesn't matter. Just the order that it's written doesn't have to be the order that I write them left to right. So it could look something like that. Actually, that's not a capital U, is it? There we go. All right. Now just verify that you have everything. Once you've made a drawing, you just want to make sure, did you represent everything that was mentioned in the description? Plane? Plane is, you can think of it as a flat surface. It's also something that is invisible and not possible to really see in real life, but we can represent it in geometry. It's a flat surface with no thickness that extends forever. So sort of like an infinitely big tabletop. The way we draw that, we usually represent it with what looks like a crooked rectangle, or if you know the term parallelogram, usually it looks like that. It doesn't have to look like that. And there's several different ways to name it, but first, why don't you write down the official definition in your notes. Okay, so like I said, when you draw a plane, if it's not part of a larger figure, usually just draw it as a parallelogram like such. There's two ways to name it. The first way is with the easiest way, with a single capital letter. This capital letter does not represent a point, it's just a label for the plane. It's supposed to be in script, but I don't know how to write in script. You probably don't either. Make it capital, do not draw a little point next to it, and you'll be fine. Then we can also name a plane with points. It would have to be 3 points, and they would have to be non-collinear. That highlighted part is the part students tend to forget about, so pay special attention to it. We'll explain why they have to be non-collinear in a future video. So, non-collinear, there we go. Those do not look like they're on the same line. Call them whatever you want. They're capital letters because they're points. So we would name this, if we're using the green method here, we would call it plane R. We'd have the word plane, we'd have the R. There you go. There's no symbol for plane. If we use it with the 3 letters, we would call it plane. The order of the letters doesn't matter. I usually go alphabetical, but whatever. You can call it plane BAC. You can call it plane CAB. Just remember you're using points. Points are capitalized. And so any permutation of those 3 letters would be fine. Any arrangement of those 3 letters would be fine. All right. Draw plane RST. Well, draw yourself a parallelogram. It's called RST. It's named with 3 points. They have to be non-collinear. So just, there you go. There's plane RST. On the right-hand side, name that plane 2 ways, using 3 letters and then using a single letter. If you're going to use a single letter, it cannot be one of the points. It would be a label that's in the corner somewhere. So I'll do that easier one first. That would be plane R. If I'm using the method with 3 letters, then I have to make sure that the three letters that I use are non-collinear. So an easy mistake to make would be to call this plane ABC. That would be incorrect because A, B, and C are collinear. They need to be non-collinear. Again, explanation for that in the future. So we could call this plane ADB, and there's lots of other names you could use as well. Okay, A, D, and B are non-collinear, so that's a legitimate name there. Coplanar. On the same plane, that's a generic way to think of it, and that's pretty much the official way to think of it as well. Points that lie in the same plane. You could also say they lie on the same plane. You could just say that they're points that are on the same plane. But they don't have to just be points. You could have two lines that are coplanar as well, but the definition refers to the points that make up the line, the points that make up the segment, or whatever other figure is there. So there's no symbol for collinear or coplanar, sorry. But here's the official definition. Okay, so for this one, line A is on plane B, points C, D, and E are collinear on line A. This is a lot to try to picture at once. So try to break it down into parts and draw the parts, then make sure that you have everything represented. Because when you're trying to draw something complicated, sometimes it's hard to visualize all of it. So all of this, let's see, line A is on plane B. So here's a plane. We have a single capital letter being used for the name of the plane. So that means that letter does not represent a point. It's a label, goes in one of the corners. Line A is somewhere on this plane. That means within the perimeter of this parallelogram that I drew. All right, there we go. That line is named with a single lowercase letter. That's a label, goes near one of the arrows. It does not represent a point. Then we have more. All right, so it looks like we have done all of that. Now there's a bunch of stuff happening on line A. What's happening is C, D, and E are collinear on line A. So 3 points that are on line A. They're collinear. The order doesn't matter. Just put them in the order they were listed there. And then just double check that you have everything represented. We have line A on plane B, yes. Do we have points C, D, and E? Yes. Do we have line A? Yes. Are those points collinear on line A? Yes. Pay special attention to whether things represent points or not. Does B represent a point? No. Does A? No. Does C, D, and E? Yes. Pay attention to uppercase, lowercase. Pay attention to where you have arrows and where you don't. All of that stuff is small things you could think are simple, but they're a lot to keep track of. Kids overlook them and then they're shocked when they have difficulty. All right, segments. Segment is, you can think of it as a group of points that starts and stops. That's not the official definition. You'll need to know the official definition, and here it is. Part of a line, right? So it's part of a line. Let's say we have a line. We just want to focus on this part of it, and we don't care about this other stuff. We have a segment. The line is still there, but we're just not focusing on it. Part of a line consisting of 2 points and all the points between them. Okay, looks like that in geometry. So there's your official definition. Pause the video and write it in to your notes. Okay, so we have some examples on the right. Sometimes the points are drawn, sometimes they're not drawn, but if you see something like this, you can assume D and E represent points because they're capitalized. So the example name for either one of those situations is you would name it with 2 points with a segment symbol above, because we don't want to confuse ourselves by thinking we're talking about a line. So we use a little segment symbol above. So that would be DE. We could also call it segment ED. We don't write the word segment in front. If you do, it's not wrong. It's just not necessary or typical. The segment symbol is what tells us that we care about the segment itself. Okay, then we have endpoint. The name is a little confusing because it has the word end in it, but it doesn't have to be where something ends. It could also be where something begins. So it's a point at one end of a segment or at the starting point of an array, which I know we didn't talk about what array is, but Ray has endpoint in the definition, endpoint has Ray in the definition. I had to start somewhere. Here we are. So here's the official definition. Pause the video, write that in your notes. And as far as a drawing, well, if you're talking about a ray looks like that, and we'll get to it in a second, but we have this here. A would be the endpoint. So A is the name of the endpoint in that drawing. And in this drawing here, another endpoint would be C, another endpoint would be D. They're all points, they're all capitalized. There's no symbol for endpoint. Ray, if you think of a ray of light, it has a starting point, and if it's not obstructed, it goes on forever in one single direction. And what it sort of looks like is an arrow that goes in one direction, but that's not official. What is official is it's part of a line that starts at an endpoint and extends forever in one direction, which is represented as you see there. So go ahead and write that official definition into your notes. And let's see, we have a drawing on the right-hand side. There's a specific way to name a ray, and the letters have to be in a certain order. The first letter in the name has to be the endpoint. So in the diagram on the right, B is the endpoint. B has to come first. And then any other point that's on the ray. So we could call that ray BC, or we could call it ray BA. There's a little ray symbol. But again, B has to come first because it's the endpoint. So the little ray symbol would always point to the right like that. And you can see here's the endpoint in the little symbol, and here's the endpoint below it. Endpoint in the symbol, endpoint below it. So the arrow always points to the right. The first letter is always the endpoint. All right, then we have a specific type of ray called opposite rays. Now, if you look in this definition, you'll see the importance of vocabulary and geometry because you already have a definition with 3 new words within it. So if you don't know what any of those 3 words mean, then you don't fully understand what opposite rays are. So that's just an example of the importance of the vocabulary. So opposite rays are 2 collinear rays that share an endpoint. So think about what collinear means. And here's what it would look like. Now it sort of just looks like a line with a point on it, but there's really 2 parts of the line that we care about. All right, so we care about that, we care about that. Those are 2 separate rays. They share an endpoint, they're collinear. They're called opposite rays. So pause the video, write that official definition in there. There's no symbol for ray. We would just say, well, let me just draw one here. A, B, C. If we're naming 2 rays, we're just going to say that ray BA and ray BC are opposite rays. So that's how you would express that. There's no symbol for opposite rays. You would just have to kind of write it out in that sentence fragment there. So I guess that's a full sentence. All right, so a couple of drawings. A segment with endpoints T and Q. Keep in mind that T and Q are points, so they need to be capitalized. Opposite rays A, B, and AC. Well, they're opposite rays. They share an endpoint. The endpoint is A. So here's the endpoint. And then it doesn't matter if the B is on the left or the right, but B and C have to be on opposite sides of A. So we have ray AB, and we have ray AC. They are opposite rays. And those are all that's a lot of vocabulary. It's that way in the whole chapter. Keep in mind again that the vocabulary is very important, and make sure that you fully understand those definitions. Ask questions if you don't. Spend some time reviewing them. And now just give yourself a sense of how well you think you understand how to identify, name, and draw all of those different things. I know it really well. Thank God. And have a good day.